down a studio album or something while we were here, but like maybe not. Literally no.
That's a good question. If you two were to record an album right now, what genre would it be?
Oh my gosh. I feel like it would be a Mamma Mia remix, Mamma Mia 3, giving the public what they really want.
Mamma Mia.
Cool. All right, you are now live
On the YouTube.
Great, thank you, Pav.
Thank you, Pav.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us here in the space, at the Boundless Idea Space, as well as joining us online if you're watching. My name's Rob Drummer. I'm the Artistic Director of Boundless Theatre, and it's a real pleasure to be joined by Matt Woodhead, who is Co-Artistic Director of Lung Theatre. We're here this afternoon, I hope, to hear about your work and the work of Lung and the campaigning work you do. And also, I hope to talk a little bit about engaging communities, maybe unlikely communities or people who don't often get invited into theatres traditionally. The Idea Space here in London, which we've popped up for 3 days, is an attempt, I hope a successful attempt, to welcome people into a space again. It's been over a year now since any of us working in theatre have been able to work easily and comfortably in spaces. So for us at Boundless, this is our sort of first go at welcoming people. So welcome, Matt. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And this conversation, I guess, is partly inspired by one of the shows that we'll be making later this year, a show called How to Save the Planet When You're a Young Carer and Broke. That show is currently in development and is one of the 3 shows that have inspired the work here in the space. We are really hoping in our community of Bermondsey, South London, that we can take that work into communities to work with young carers and to create, you know, restrictions being lifted, hopefully, a really great social experience for young people around that work. Could you talk to us a bit about your work and about Lung, instead of me sort of hacking through a biography?
I really want you to, though,
yeah.
do you know what I mean?
I'll just make some stuff up. But yeah, do you want to sort of just tell us a bit about your work and the work of Lung?
Yeah, of course, and thank you so much for having me. It's so great to be here, and we were kind of like, there's a workshop happening in this space just before we came in, and it was just really beautiful I must have looked like an absolute psycho at the window, like looking through, but it was actually really beautiful to just see people in a space again. It's really, really lovely. So yeah, I'm the co-artistic director of the theatre company Lung, and for the past like 6 years now, we've been working with young carers. So it kind of started from a play called Who Cares? And basically like 4 teenagers from Salford came into a room at the Lowry Theatre, and we were like, would you like to make a verbatim play about your life and what it means to you to be a young carer? And I think the reason that we decided that it should be a verbatim play was, well, because we're a verbatim theatre company, so like that's probably one reason, if I'm being honest. But like another one is that I feel like a lot of teenagers say, oh, I feel a little bit like I'm being talked at as a teenager and I'm not actually given an opportunity to speak for myself. So verbatim is a really tricky art form because, like, you know, at best, I think it can be an incredibly like socially engaged and meaningful process. At worst, it can be a little bit like taking someone's story and then like running a mile. So like we were really cautious in the curation of the play that the young people were involved in like every step of the production. So they were involved in casting the show. All of their favourite songs were in the show. Their parents fed back on drafts of the scripts. The young people fed back on drafts of the scripts. Like, and they were kind of really instrumental in like deciding what happened to the show. So there's an estimated 700,000 young carers in the UK. So that is someone who like can care for a brother, a sibling, and that can be because of alcohol addiction, mental health, just a huge, like a physical disability. It's a huge, huge, huge thing. And 70% of those young carers are hidden. So that means they're kind of not identified or known by services or received the support that they're like the statutory support that they're entitled to. So with the show, like we popped it up in youth zones, in like schools, as well as taking the show to the House of Lords as well. And like I think as well, it was a really amazing place to like test the work out as well. Like I remember when we took the show to Wigan Youth Zone, for example, like in one of the more boring sections of the play that has now been cut, like the group went out to get a McDonald's and then they came back like 20 minutes later to then watch the rest of the play. And it was an amazing place and space for us to be able to test the work as well and see what works, what doesn't, what can we shake up. And since then we've like, the show's been performed in loads of different places. We've identified lots of hidden young carers and like a campaign has been launched and we've been busy over lockdown as well. So it's felt like this process and this play that has grown and developed over time.
And is that, so I'm really interested in that campaign element. Was there any sense of that when you met this group of young people and started thinking about the show, did that just naturally kind of grow out of getting to know them and sort of, because it's sustained itself, right? That kind of campaigning element around the production.
Yeah, I think we got like, I think if we're honest, like, I was in a meeting with, like, there's this amazing group called National Forum who are like, lots of young carer services meet every month to kind of talk about it. And one of the women in the group who's one of the young carer service managers was like saying, oh my gosh, like I feel like I've been doing this job for 15 years and we're still like banging on about all of the same issues and nothing's changing. And like, I think like with the play, like we would tour and we would work with local young carer services, and if someone was like, oh my gosh, I think I might be a young carer, or like, oh, that's my mum's story, or that's my dad's story, or that's me, like there was a young carers lead who we could refer them to so they could get support. But as well, like I think it felt a little bit like, oh, we're just screaming into the void as well. And I think like for meaningful change to happen, I feel like you have to do that grassroots stuff because that's really important, because it can hopefully change young people's lives. But also like you have to do that national campaigning and that banging of the drum as well. And we hit a point when we were like 3 or 4 years into the show's life and we were in Edinburgh, and like we were like, oh, maybe it's actually time to use the momentum to like to do something. And then we did like a big launch event, and we did a very like dodgy balloon thing where we got the wrong helium, so it kind of went up and then down again. So like it was a good start to the campaign, but you know what I mean, the photos make it look like the balloons floated, so that's all you need, right?
What's that journey been then? So what has shifted and changed for you over the years? Do you feel like there is more conversation, more useful conversation? Do you think the show, the kind of people you've been able to meet, has there been a sort of positive change through those last several years as the campaign sort of continued? Yeah,
I think like, and again, like we formed like a working policy group that's kind of looking at that bigger national stuff. So we've been working with like people in the NHS, like people like solicitors, health workers, young carer services, to kind of draft some policies that we're going to be testing out in Salford this autumn. And really excited for that. And we've managed, and I think as well, like it's a really powerful thing about art and theatre as well, because like I think having a play has allowed people to come and see and understand, and because it's been from the words and the experiences of these incredible 4 young people, like I think it's meant that like people can go, oh my gosh, I thought I understood what it meant to be a young carer, but now I know and now I understand. And then it's meant that like we've gone, okay, cool, so now we've kind of got your interest about like young carers. It's like, have you thought about our working policy group? Or like we've got a fundraiser to support young carers who are like facing digital poverty at the moment. Have you thought about donating to that and stuff? So it's like art can be a really, really powerful way of like brokering conversations. And I think in the pandemic, with the amount of people who've been watching things on Netflix and like Amazon Prime or whatever, I think people do, the art has had more value, I think, in this lockdown, and I think now it's just us trying to like capitalize and use that as we emerge into this, I'll call it the third stage or whatever, like whatever messy lockdown we're in now, but like our in between, our new normal, whatever you want to vibe it as.
Have you had a chance through these many stages of lockdowns to like have like really specific conversations with these young people? Like, what's your sense of how the past year's been? I suppose we're really aware, sort of open that up a little bit as a company, talking to young artists, freelancers, people at the early stage of their careers, and just young people who want stuff to do, right? And I'm struck by how I think a bit of laziness crept in, that with so much digital culture suddenly being everywhere, young people were being served better than they'd ever been served before. Yeah. And then we sort of found that our sort of digital engagement work was starting to kind of decline, or young people were kind of, as we kind of came into this year perhaps, were less and less interested, versus the beginning of last summer where like it was really easy to sign people up. I felt like speaking with people, creating spaces, getting people together feels really important. But like how's your sense of the last year for some of the young people around the work you've been doing?
Yeah, I think that's really, I think online drop-off has been something that like everyone's experienced, and I think like because so many young people's like learning has been online as well, and it's like, okay, so you just had like, you know, the most hanging like algebra lesson of your life, and it's now like, come on to Zoom with, you know, and it'll be fun, I promise, come. I think like we did, connection was a big thing for us during lockdown. So Gitika, our engagement manager, kind of pioneered this Young Carers Creative Makers group, and we kind of linked up young carers from like Salford and Folkestone and North Wales and Ellesmere Port and Cheshire West. And I think actually like the young carers came together in those groups and actually really loved and enjoyed being able to like speak to one another and connect with one another. And I think like there's something that we have to be really careful, I think, with labels around young carers as well, because I think like it's really important and empowering sometimes to have a label, whatever label you choose to identify and own in this life. Like, so I am a young carer, that's amazing, but I think it's also important to remember that young people exist outside of those labels as well. And I think something that we're always really mindful of is like empowering people to be activists and to campaign where they want, but also allowing people the creativity and space to be able to just, you know, like write a song about a tree, or like do whatever else they want to do as well. But I think like in terms of the landscape, I think all of the, and again, like this is the whole vibe with the pandemic, wasn't it? All of the kind of growth kind of crap that was bubbling underneath the surface the whole time really like came out in the pandemic, but we were really kind of fortunate to be able to like work with like young carers services during the time. So we worked with Salford Primary Care together to like create a COVID hotline for young carers who like were looking for PPE or looking for advice. And I think like there's a lot of local activism out there, and I think it's sometimes just about like finding your people.
Yeah. No, I think that's so important, and I'm really hopeful. And it's interesting you talk about verbatim. I worked on a show called Home at the National a few years ago.
Oh my gosh, cool.
With Nadia Fall, and we did a huge amount of work with a sort of a housing sort of shelter for young homeless people in Tower Hamlets, and had some glorious, fun, stressful, brilliant kind of conversations and experiences with a whole load of like young mums, young people who had kind of very recently kind of found themselves in this space or had been there for a bit longer. And over a period of time, that became this show. And I remember this lovely moment where one of the young guys that we were talking with just started singing a Beyonce song. And we hadn't really thought about music necessarily. Nadia, I think that kind of came out of this just moment where somebody wanted to sing, and then that became the character of the whole show. And verbatim for me, I think the best verbatim allows for those gaps and those discoveries. Like, how do you approach making that theatre? Like, does it start with a question? Does it start with something you think you want to explore? Is it people bringing stuff to you? Like, what's that process around verbatim?
Yeah, I think as well, like whenever you say verbatim theatre, it can sometimes be like, oh my gosh, the Worthy Brigade are coming to get us. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, and actually, like, you know, it's kind of like, is it going to be like a black box and a stool and like, you know, some kind of like, it could be like the most like worst hour and a half of your life because some people have said it, it doesn't mean that it's true though. Do you know what I mean? Oh my God, it's a verbatim play. And I think that's a big existential question that we have a lot, which is like, oh my gosh, how do we actually make it engaging? How do we make it interesting? Because it's like, it's entertainment at the end of the day. And it's entertainment because I think, or I use that term quite loosely, but like being able to challenge and provoke and like capture people's imagination, I think like is the best way to inform and change people's minds. So that's me I've just dodged the question. So how do we actually do verbatim theatre? It really varies. Like, I think with the work, so there's this verbatim playwright years ago called Peter Cheeseman, who used to run the New Vic in Stoke-on-Trent, and Peter Cheeseman used to make these plays where it was like really like local issues, and it's like, oh, they're building a new motorway. What does everybody think? And there's this like documentary that I think has been consigned to history, but you've got all of these actors and all of these audience members who are kind of like got their heads in their hands. And I think like, while those local issues can sometimes be really important and powerful, they don't necessarily stand the test of time. And I think with the work that we do, we're always interested in like what is going to like hopefully exist in like 10 or 15 years, or something that someone might pick up and go like, oh my gosh, this is interesting, or hopefully this is interesting, or they might go, oh. But I think we're always looking at like being quite playful in the way that we work with the different groups that we work with, but also in the way that we collect testimony as well. And that's like interviewing someone on the bus, or like interviewing somebody at a protest or a campaign, or like just going to someone's house and getting them to show you around and stuff as well. And I think like sometimes people kind of can interpret verbatim very literally and be like, oh my gosh, well, the interview happened in a coffee shop, therefore this must be staged in a coffee shop, and if we don't have that exact like Costa coffee cup, then like the whole production's ruined. Like, it has to be that authentic. But I think like when it works and when it sings is when it's like it pushes and it pulls, and verbatim allows for a prism of voices, and it allows for discussion and debate. And I think there's been, over the last few years, and particularly in the pandemic, I think there's been like a lot of poverty and starvation of like different perceptions, different debates, etc. And also we really like it because it's just really fun because you get to meet loads of really cool people as well.
Especially when like there was a performance of Home where all of the young people and the staff and their mates and their kids like all turned up at the shed where the show was on at the National and watched the show. And I remember, like, you know, and this is a show with like Michaela Cole, Kadeef Kowan, like wonderful actors who'd met these people, but like stepping onto a stage when you've got young people who are going to watch themselves became one of the most exciting theatre experiences I've ever had. And just that kind of conversation that was literally happening with the show from the audience felt really lively. And I kind of hold in my head quite often when I'm thinking about the shows we want to make or the way we want to build community, especially with young adults who are the only community we're really interested in at Boundless, allowing space for that social, easy conversation, which verbatim I think can be really, the best version of it can be really good for, right? The stuff that isn't kind of worthy. Why is there kind of an invisibility for young carers? Like where does that come from? Is that kind of I'm not even going to guess. Like, where do you think that invisibility comes from?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's still stigma around caring for someone. I think a lot of young people feel like if you look at the stats, like we're in a verbatim play, like 68% of young carers are bullied at school, and I think like there's still a lot of stigma that needs to be unpicked and a lot of work that needs to be done to kind of like show that actually if you are a young carer, you get 50 million more skills than someone else in your kind of peer group. So I think like there's something around that. I think adults aren't necessarily looking for it, and I think it's like how it's normalized very quickly as well. Like one of the young people that we work with, like she became the sole young carer for her mum when she was like 5 or 6, and like her mum was like putting her in taxis every day to like go to school. And like the primary school would then, you know, be there at the other end to collect her. And it's like no one actually thought to ask if that was an appropriate level of care. I think as well it kind of comes down to like voicelessness as well. Like I think something that service managers talk about quite a lot is like actually asking that young person if they want to be providing that level of care for someone as well. And I think the flip side of that is also there's still a lot of stigma. Like lots of young people think, oh my gosh, if I tell someone that I'm a young carer, then I might be put into care, or I might be taken away, or my family might get split up. And adults aren't necessarily looking for it as well. And public awareness is still like quite low. I think it's starting to change a little bit with Carers Week and Young Carers Awareness Day and stuff. But like, I think there's still so much more work that needs to be done in terms of like reducing the stigma around being a young carer, but also equipping adults with the kind of skills to be able to actually identify and just know really know stuff like every young carer is legally entitled to an assessment of their needs, but only like 13% of young carers actually get that assessment as well. Does that vary, that potential support vary from where you live? Is there a disparity of like, if you're a young carer in a rural community versus a urban, I don't know how your groups are spread across the country, but is there a bit of a postcode lottery when it comes to being a young carer as well? Yeah. It's really, really, really mixed. And like, there's kind of stories of some young people who might even live on the same street, and one person goes to a really amazing young carer service and gets like respite days out, like gets to do loads of amazing stuff and have like support, therapy, etc. But then someone who lives on that street there might go to a different young carer service because they're in a different catchment area. And like, it comes down to funding and stuff as well, because like the government say that every council should provide a young carer service, but it's up to like the young carer service to then decide how much money that service then receives. So like, in areas like Salford, for example, the council value the service, so it gets the money to be able to provide the activity for the young people. But in other boroughs, like even across the water, or like in a few cities or whatever away, or a few boroughs away, the service doesn't have as much funding as well. So like, and in the climate of austerity and the climate of cuts as well, like that has been really, really squeezed for young carers. And now the climate of COVID, right? So we're kind of hopefully coming out of these sort of severe lockdowns, and kind of, you know, we're very aware, we're based in Bermondsey in South London, and, you know, a community that is
really hurting from the last year. You know, the business community, young people, already a community pre-COVID that was, you know, suffering austerity and kind of, I'm quite anxious now to make sure we get back as a kind of company that is trying to create opportunities and paid work and kind of experiences for young people and the people in their lives. I'm quite restless actually about trying to get back there after working from home. Mm-hmm. What would you say to, and maybe this is sort of like the final little line of questioning, but like I feel like I'm hearing more and more from younger or earlier career artists about more socially engaged, community engaged work that isn't necessarily about participation, that isn't necessarily about kind of project-driven stuff going into a community and there not being a sort of public outcome, but actually work, stories, and kind of building audiences. What would you say to those artists who are just starting out about working with perhaps a community that don't have mainstream representation, like young carers, or don't feel like they're given meaningful support or space? Like, the ethics of working with people who are least represented. Like, if you're starting out, where's that piece of advice? What's that piece of advice you'd give to a young theatre maker who wants to work within communities?
I think it's really messy. I think it's really, really messy. And there's kind of this kind of myth that, like, I think it's because, like, with, like, theatre companies and with individual artists or whatever, like, I feel like everyone's very good at, like, packaging up their work and making it very shiny and sanitized for, like, social media. And actually what you don't see a lot of the time is, like, how messy this kind of work is. And I mean messy in a kind of glorious, fun way. And also sometimes, like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next kind of way. I feel like each group is really different. Like, I think when we did our first production and I was like, reflecting back on that, I was like, there we go. And that's how you do it. Like, you know, like, hit me up at Bloomsbury, I can write a book now, I'm sorted. And then, like, we went from working with football fans in Bradford to working with 29 single mums from the Focus E15 hostel in Newham. And then, like, we then worked with the young carers. And I think, like, each group is really, really different. And I think it's trying to find out that balance between, like, empowering the people that you're working with and the core people that you're working with to, like, be able to drive the car and be able to have the autonomy in the process, but also, like, not completely overburdening people with that responsibility either, and, like, allowing and trusting yourself to be able to sometimes co-steer that car too, or sometimes lead the way, or sometimes let other people lead the way. I think, because I think sometimes my nightmare is someone coming into a room with me and then saying, like, okay, so, like, you want to make a play, like, what do you want to do? Like, the blank page fucking terrifies me. And I think, like, it's okay to be like, oh, okay, it could be this, what do you think? And to steer and genuinely co-create.
Amazing. Thank you, Matt. And look, thank you for joining us for this chat.
Under the tree.
Sitting under the trees. No, I really appreciate it. And thank you for just helping us start to kind of think about engaging with communities and also kind of young carers who I hope we can learn something from you and the work you've been doing as we, especially in South London, build a community around that work. So I really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.